Hello, everybody. Some almost 15 years ago, I did a show when the show was on TechCrunch. One of my more memorable shows, at least from my point of view, with the great, I don't know what you would call him, a marketing or self-invention or culture maven from New York City, Seth Godin. At the time, he had a new book out called Linchpin, Are You Indispensable? And when we talked in February 2011, he suggested to me that while we weren't paying attention, the industrial age just ended. It was a very Godin-esque kind of thing to say, profoundly stimulating and thought-provoking. And we had a wonderful conversation. So I'm thrilled that Seth is back on the show. He has a new book. It's called This is Strategy, Make Better Plans. It's out this month, and Seth is joining me from just north of New York. Seth, congratulations on the new book. 23 bestsellers in 39 languages, at least according to your website. Does that include This is Strategy?
It also includes Urdu, so it depends on which number you're counting. But yes, This is Strategy. The magic of permission marketing is that when you write for people who want you to write for them, the act of making your book a bestseller isn't the hard part. The hard part is earning their trust again.
So, Seth, we last talked almost 15 years ago. I was amazed that you remembered it as well. You noted when we sat down together, I think we were in New York back then, that the industrial age just ended. What's happened since? Do we have a replacement age, or are we living in an in-between period?
Well, I think we should set our calendars to check in every 13 years. I think that that's a good pace for eras these days. The industrial age was 150 years old, and it was about how hard it was to make things. And school was built around creating compliant factory workers, but it went away because making things isn't as useful or important as connecting people, because lots of people can make things, but connecting people turned out to be challenging and really useful. And that era is, as we speak, stuttering because we misused it. And now, of course, it's the era of two pieces, carbon and AI. And I think that what's going to happen going forward is we're either going to work for AI or AI is going to work for us.
Wow. A lot to talk about. Back in 2008, you wrote a book and was wonderfully entitled. It was, of course, a bestseller. It was even a bestseller for Godin. I think it was one of your more successful books, Tribes. We Need You to Lead Us. Back then, the word tribe was neutral. Today, it's taken on, I think, a darker meaning. Are we living, Seth, more and more in an age of tribes, perhaps an age of tribes that you're not particularly comfortable in?
Well, first, I just want to clarify for a few people. The term tribe goes back tens of thousands of years, but colonialists, particularly in the United States and Australia, have used it as a way to denigrate indigenous peoples. And I certainly, if you read the book, you'll see I had nothing.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not suggesting that.
No, I'm not saying you did, but I like to bring that up because I've heard from a dozen people over the years, and I wanted to clarify. Tribes are the basic human organization measure, that we lived in villages of 150 people, that Dunbar's number evolved for a reason, that we have 150 people, we would go to their funeral. We have 150 people in our closest circle. And what has happened is, amplified by selfish social media algorithms, we have divided ourselves in a moment when there was no reason to do so. And you can make a profit dividing people. And when we add to that the amplification of negative ideas, it's easy for someone who doesn't mean well to take advantage of our instinct to follow, our instinct to be in a cult, or instinct to say, me too, and use it against us. So I wish I had highlighted that in the book. It wouldn't have changed anything, but at least I could have said I highlighted it.
You said that you can make a profit dividing people. Of course, you meant Profit. Right. Seems today, Seth, playing around with that word. The prophets, Prophet, are the very people who are dividing people. What is so prophetic, at least in the minds of some, about dividing people? Why do we find that so attractive, or so many of us find it attractive?
This is a brilliant question. Paul Simon probably knows the answer better than me, but I think that we are hardwired for hope. That hope, and we're not the only creature that has it, gets us through difficult moments. And what has happened for thousands of years is we have put on top of our instinct for spirituality a human construct of organized religion and culture built around it, which is designed to amplify power, not to deliver hope. And so when a prophet first shows up, they tend to trigger our desire for hope, for meaning, for reassurance. But often over time, because the culture rewards that level of certainty and authority, it often goes off the rails.
You say we're, Seth, hardwired for hope. You're not a Silicon Valley guy, although you're probably not uncomfortable there. It's the kind of thing that someone in Silicon Valley might say. What exactly does that mean?
It's a great question. I did live in Silicon Valley for a while. I don't agree with so much of what the tech bros say. But what I mean by hardwired is this. Everything about us is at some level hardware, not software. That we are neurons and electricity and wet stuff. But if you have in your genes instincts to do things that do not lead to you reproducing, those instincts tend to die out. So that's why you don't usually see a peacock with little feathers, because peacocks with little feathers don't get laid, they don't have little peacocks, and their little feather instinct dies out. I believe that if you had an instinct for hopelessness, it's unlikely that you would have lots of grandchildren. And so the kinds of people who ended up populating our culture, our peoples, were people who had enough resilience and hope to push through, even though the world wasn't what they were hoping for.
So there's a kind of Darwinian element to hope. You're not a particularly political person, although perhaps we can talk about that a little bit more later. But when people like J.D. Vance criticize others, particularly women, for not wanting to have children, do you think there's a kind of an unspoken Darwinian element there, that they're suggesting that our species, which should be hardwired for hope, for producing more generations, has somehow gone wrong?
Well, to quote a politician from a generation or two ago, I knew Charles Darwin, I served with Charles Darwin, and you, sir, are no Charles Darwin.
Perfect.
Charles Darwin wrote the foreword for my book, Survival is Not Enough. And I've studied Darwin under Dan Dennett. And it's very clear that cultural Darwinism, social Darwinism, micro-Darwinism is nonsense. And there are so many ways that you can show that it's nonsense, that culture evolves for a whole bunch of interesting reasons, but we don't make Darwinian decisions on a daily basis. That's not how evolution works. And people who imply that there's something immoral about not acting in a fully, quote, Darwinian way are manipulating us.
When we talked last time in 2011, I asked you why you were so popular. You had an interesting response. You suggest that you notice things that other people miss, the really big things. Back then we talked about linchpin, but over the last 14 or 15 years, Seth, since we last spoke, what have we all missed?
Well, I'm not sure we all missed it, but
most of us, or many of us.
I would say that my job remains the same, which is to use clear language to help people see something that after they see it, realize they saw it all along, and to do it in a way that makes it easy for them to tell their friends. that I'm not trying to change people's minds as much as I'm trying to help them see what they're already seeing, but with a narrative. And I was early in saying social media wants you to work for them for free. And if you are going to absorb their false metrics, you're about to become unpaid labor. So I've never actively used Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, really, because to win at that game, you have to sign up for what they want, not for what you want. And as our culture, the network effect, becomes ever more centralized, I think it's easy to be seduced into thinking, oh, well, the only way I can make a difference is to be popular on TikTok. And the answer to that question is no, that's not true. That's just what they want you to think.
You say we're all hardwired for hope, which I assume includes yourself. Have you been disappointed with the world over the last 12 or 13 years? In other words, are you more or less hopeful than you were when we last spoke?
When I found out that the phrase carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum to make us feel like hypocrites so we would be quiet about climate, that was heartbreaking. David Ogilvy was one of my marketing heroes a long time ago. And to imagine that there are people at Ogilvy and Mather charging money to make up things like that, knowing what they were doing, to see the way the Jewel was aggressively marketed to 14-year-olds, to watch politicians completely forget about governance and just play in the mud as much as they could. It's easy to lose hope when you look at that. But my conviction is that the arc of justice really is bending. And if you're day trading, you're going to be upset and unhappy. But if you can look for the arc and how you can see the systems at work and influence them, there's a lot that human beings have going for them.
You're a marketing person, though, Seth. As you said, you've worked in the industry. You've had some startups associated with that. Why would you be surprised that marketers come up with sexy slogans to promote very unpleasant things or to generate lies? Isn't that what the business is all about?
You know, there are a lot of people in business who would like government to stay out of it and count on business to have self-restraint. And I've been in the room where self-restraint has been on the agenda, and often self-restraint actually happens. There are lots of examples of institutions that take a slightly longer view. You know who Bill Graham was, right? The concert promoter.
Yeah.
So he came to visit Stanford when I was a student, and I raised my hand and I said, "What's going on with the Bruce Springsteen tickets for $18? You sell Bruce Springsteen tickets for $18. You sell out in 5 minutes. Why don't you charge $180? Because you're leaving all this money on the table." And Bill turned to me and he said, "Well, here's the deal. There's only a finite number of people in San Francisco, and I want them to see music all year round. And it's okay with me to lose a little bit of money on a Bruce Springsteen concert because next week I can get them to come to a different concert." There's a form of self-restraint in that that's the opposite of a pharma bro raising the price of a life-saving pharmaceutical by 10x. And what has shifted is we've sharpened the point of Ayn Randian market economics, where you feel like if you don't cheat, you're going to lose. And it's on us to highlight, Cory Doctorow does this so beautifully, that it feels like enshittification is what you have to do, but in fact it's not. And that the companies who do that end up sooner rather than later failing.
Yeah, I wonder if that spread sort of more broadly in a horrible way to the culture. When you watch professional sports, particularly, I'm a big English football fan. Everyone is cheating all the time. It's almost taken for granted. It seems to be the same in politics and in business. How is that happen? So it's not just the marketing mavens, the Ogilvies of the world. Everyone is trying to cheat all the time, and it just seems to be acceptable and taken for granted. And of course, it's being manifested these days in politics.
Well, what you're describing is the race to the bottom. And the problem with the race to the bottom is you can win, and then you have to live at the bottom. And what we see is when an institution cheats so much that they disgust the people they're engaging with, the institution fades away. And there are plenty of institutions and people who do not cheat. And in the short run, they lose. But in the long run, the resilience that comes from that pays off. And it is entirely possible that one day someone will press a big red button that just blows us all up and we won't get another chance. But until that happens, this turbulence that comes from Schumpeter's creative destruction of someone hustling and hustling, racing to the bottom, porn sites putting up snuff films. Then all of a sudden, everyone says, don't count me in for this. And they walk off to the next thing. And the optimist in me is hopeful that that cycle continues.
The hard wiring is working. You've said that we live in an era of carbon and AI. The issue of global warming seems to be something of great importance personally to you. You made a speech in September suggesting that we can still tackle climate change. What is it about climate change that makes it so important for you? I mean, you've talked about social media and lying, and I know you care about other stuff too. But is there something special about climate change for you? Is it symbolic or concrete?
It's both. It's concrete because it's the only issue I can think of that affects every single person on the planet. When we have 15 million climate refugees, when we have entire regions of countries that will be uninhabitable forever, and when we have famines, everyone's going to start noticing this. So there's the universality of it. But the other part of it is that this was created by a system that the participants in the system saw what was happening, and they decided to kick the issue down the road. So let's take, for example, plastics recycling. Plastics recycling was invented by the plastics industry, but they know they cannot recycle the plastic that is going in the blue bin. That the blue bin, throughout my country anyway, almost everywhere, when you throw a plastic bottle in there, they burn it. And it feels to me like at such a large scale, a conspiracy, an unspoken conspiracy to do something in the short run. But my optimism is simple. This was caused by the market, and the market with accurate information can fix it. And what's missing is incorporating the actual price of carbon into what we charge for things that have carbon in them so that people can make accurate decisions. And once that happens, I believe the market will wake up in a very short period of time and start to undo a lot of what it did.
I wonder if it's already doing it with what seems to be at least the crisis in the insurance industry and the price of insurance, which most people don't quite understand, but it seems to be a direct consequence of what you're talking about.
That's correct. And the method here, which a bipartisan group in DC and in Europe is working on, is just give everyone a check and fund that check by charging a price for carbon, so the government doesn't touch the money. And what that would mean is if you have a choice between two things to buy, and this one has a lot of embodied carbon and this one doesn't, this one's going to cost a lot more, and the money you spend is going to go to everybody else who's going to have to pay for it. So, trotting out statistics isn't particularly helpful, but I will tell you, for example, 25% of our climate problem is caused by cows. That means that if we got rid of the cows in one day, we'd eliminate 25% of the problem. But we're not going to do it as long as beef is convenient, cheap, and high status. And we can't change the convenience of it, and we can't easily change the status, but we can change the price. And once we change the price, smart people will make better decisions.
Yeah, we've done a number of shows on that and the destructive role of cows. I always used to feel virtuous because I don't eat hamburgers, but then I realized that I drink about 400 cups of tea a day and I have milk in it. So I'm probably no more virtuous than anyone else. So what's clear, Seth, and you're not the first or the last person to note this, that we need to make better plans. And that's the subtitle of your new book. This is strategy. We always think of strategy and tactics. Is strategy a word that should always be thought of in in the context of its opposite, tactics? What is exactly strategy?
So you said the key word there, which is opposite, not partner. And it's called This is Strategy because people don't know what strategy is. And most books on strategy are actually books about tactics. Strategy is a philosophy of how we will become the future. Strategy is not a promise. It is not a plan. It is the way we make a plan. It is our assertions about how the world is today and our assertions about how we will dance with how it is today to create a future that is not here yet. And organizations and individuals and nations that have resilient strategies have less stress and more success. But if you're trying to hold on as tight as you can to yesterday's tactics, it feels like the world is out to get you.
So is strategy long-term and tactics short-term? It's the wood for the trees argument.
Tactics you can change all the time. Tactics can be a secret. Tactics can give you a temporary advantage. Strategy, on the other hand, you should tell everyone about because you want everyone you're working with to know where you're headed. And strategy is easy to describe and hard to stick with. So they can go together, but it's not really short or long term as much as it is understanding that one of them involves the nuance of seeing the systems and the games and time that's around us. And the other one is how do we win this round?
So would it be fair to say that without strategy, you can't really have tactics, or if you do, the tactics are incoherent and immediate. And to have a good strategy, you need to implement tactics. I mean, you can't have strategy without tactics, but unless you have strategy, you can't really implement tactics. Is that one way of thinking about these two things?
Well, let's put a little bit of color on this. Most people who do tactics stole them from someone else, and they use them without understanding why they're doing it. And so, a white tablecloth in a restaurant is a tactic. It is a tactic designed to help your customer feel like the meal is about to be worth what they're going to be charged for it. It is a cultural meme that harkens back to the King of France. But you can execute a high status restaurant without white tablecloths. But if you're stuck on the tactic without understanding what they're for, then you're stuck. So what I find when I talk to people about strategy is they have fallen in love with borrowed tactics, but they don't really understand what they're for. And so if we look at an industry like book publishing that's so broken and stuck, they're broken and stuck because they're in love with a 450-year-old set of tactics, not because they have understood their strategy. If Simon & Schuster and Random House had embraced the strategy of our job is to organize the world's information for people who are looking for information, they would have started Google. But that's not what they do. They say our tactic is to chop down trees and sell books, which is fine if the world doesn't change. But if the world changes, that tactic gets in your way.
Does that make Larry and Sergey then great strategists? I mean, who are your models for iconic strategists? We think of military tacticians in some ways, but who for you? You mentioned Darwin as well. I guess he's a scientist, maybe in a sense, a species strategist. Who are the models for you of great strategists who we should try to emulate? Because I know this is something you think. I mean, in this book, This is Strategy. You want to make us better strategists.
So Sergey and Larry had a belief at the beginning. When I was at Yahoo in 99, we had the chance to buy Google for $10 million. And that's, the most expensive business decision never made. Well,
you probably would have fucked it up though.
They would have wrecked it. I wasn't in the room, but they would have wrecked it. Here's why. Yahoo's strategy, which was brilliant when it worked, was the web is a dark and dank and confusing place. People want to use the web. So we're going to get them to come to our site and stay here. So the homepage of Yahoo had 138 links on it, most of which led back into Yahoo. That was their strategy. And for more than 5 years, it was a brilliant strategy. So you could have lots of people in the company saying, oh, here's a new tactic to support the strategy. Come to Yahoo, stay at Yahoo. Google's strategy, which they reported on their homepage with a little clock that showed how many microseconds it took, was come here and leave. Their strategy was the web is growing up and we don't want you to stay at Google. We want you to go somewhere else. And they stuck with that strategy for a long time. And now they've left that strategy behind and they are meandering without a strategy, just a whole bunch of profitable tactics that are confusing them. When I look at someone like the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., his untimely end, of course, makes it hard to understand how he would have reacted in the next cycle. But the number of brilliant choices he made to support his strategy, the arc of his strategy over 8 really difficult years, we can learn from that. We can learn from my friend Jacqueline Novogratz, who runs Acumen, and Linda Rottenberg, who runs Endeavor, 2 charities that have put over $1 billion to work, transforming the way the market works in dozens of countries around the world. Their strategy wasn't, let's make sure there are bed nets in Tanzania. Let's make sure that we're funding a clean water company. It was simply understanding the arc of how the next decade or 2 decades is going to go, and then finding tactics to help them get there. So, and I found it in a kindergarten teacher that my son had. Lenny Levine told everyone his strategy the very first day. Strategy is, you can't say you can't play. All your kids are going to learn to read one day. That's not my problem. My problem is to teach them to be kids who are kind to other kids. And once you announce that, now you have a strategy and you can find a million tactics to support it.
Is this about morality ultimately? The more you talk, Seth, the more it seems as if for you, making better plans are not about more effective or efficient or profitable plans. They're about more morally better plans. The strategists that you brought up, from MLK to your son's teacher, are all about making the world a better place.
Yeah, I'm secretly arguing for a world I'd like to live in. I think
it's not so secret. I mean, you're not shy about it. There's nothing to be embarrassed about.
Well, but the one book I put that on the cover was the book that was the hardest to sell. The thing is, I could give someone a strategy on how to be a Bond villain and not die at the end of the movie. I'm just not sure I want to participate in that.
So what does that mean? And which book was that? And doesn't that, come back to the Oprah idea? I mean, you're a success. You've got 23 bestsellers in 39 languages. You don't need another bestseller. Wouldn't you be happy to write a book that was true, even if it wasn't a bestseller? Who cares?
That's exactly what I just did. That The Song of Significance is one of the books I am the most proud of. The Song of Significance is a book I wrote when I was very ill. And I said, as I cried when I wrote it, if this is the last book I ever write, that will be fine with me. But what I said to you was, part of my tactic is to help people who have leverage and power come to believe that I do marketing and the kinds of things that they're looking for, when actually what I'm hoping to help them do is see that with the leverage they have, they can make a living and make a difference too.
You mentioned earlier that we live in the era of carbon and AI. We talked a little bit about carbon. We haven't spoken about AI. You mentioned also that you don't think the current people running Google, I think I agree with you, are very good on strategy. They tend to be problematically tactical. Do you think Sam Altman is a grand strategist? He certainly thinks of himself and behaves as if he is one.
I don't know Sam, so I don't want to judge from afar. I will say he's better at a certain kind of publicity than anyone we've seen in a long time.
Who though gets AI when it comes to strategy? Microsoft, as they always seem to do, makes a mess of it. Their relationship with OpenAI. Are there people who get it, who are strategically thinking about AI?
Okay, so Dan Schipper's newsletter is fantastic. I recommend it to everyone. It's called Every. Here's what people who are strategic about AI believe. Moore's law combined with self-teaching systems means that every day AI is going to get cheaper, faster, and smarter. And solving the problem of tricking someone into thinking it's a person, passing the Turing test, is not interesting. What is interesting is how do we put AI to work for longer time frames than 4 seconds? How do we build persistent agents that connect human beings over time? Because when you add the connection, then enormous amounts of value are created. It's not just replacing the receptionist. And, a super simple example. Let's say I have a company with 10,000 employees in it, Arthur Anderson or whoever, and an AI reads everybody's email, and an AI understands what everybody's working on. And I sit down to start working on something. The AI is going to say to me, Trisha, 7 buildings over in another city, is working on something very similar. I'm going to connect you to. That's impossible today. It's impossible to even think about it happening today. It is going to be obvious tomorrow. And when you multiply that times our daily lives, times resource allocation, times discovering the things that we need to solve a problem. I'm not being Pollyannish about this. Terrible things are going to happen, but extraordinary things are also going to happen. The same way electricity began by electrocuting elephants and then moved on to strangling people with their washing machine cord. But now we couldn't live in a world without electricity. This is the biggest change to our life since electricity.
Last time we talked, you noted that the industrial age ended when we weren't paying attention. I guess now, in an odd way, we're living in the attention economy, or perhaps the inattention economy.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly our political system of the 20th century, New Deal system, FDR, Kennedy, Johnson, all the rest of them, they were all products, both causes and effects of the industrial age. In terms of your new book, in terms of implementing better plans, we can do it, of course, at the corporate level. We can do it within schools, within families and personally, but we also need to do it at the government level. What has happened, Seth, in terms of these parallel worlds of government and then the age we live in, whether it's an industrial or a post-industrial, digital, networked age, whatever you call it? Has there been any change in the political system? Is that the biggest problem of our age?
Well, I want to distinguish between governance and politics. I think that politics is the art of having arguments about things we're not supposed to change our mind about, whereas governance is the grown-up act of actually having a community make a decision that's a good one. So I'm fascinated by governance, and I think you are absolutely correct. We base voting on how the Greeks and the Romans did it, and we can vote better. We can make better group decisions now. And it's not going to happen at the governance level to begin with. It's going to happen at the family level, at the organizational level. And I spent a year working on a voting system that was informal, that people could work on together. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if there's 5 people sitting around the table, why should the loudest, biggest, whitest guy at the table have the biggest voice in making the decision? Maybe it should go to the person who's been right the most in the past. Maybe it should go to the person who has consistently done the work associated with the issue being discussed. Well, we can now incorporate that, but we're not. We all just get on a Zoom call and reassert our status roles. So I am hopeful that from the grassroots, we will come up with new and better ways to take responsibility. And as we do that, when people take responsibility and keep their promises, as opposed to vaporware and trolling, the people who take responsibility ought to have more to say next time.
I think most people listening, or the vast majority of people, Seth, listening, they're not going to disagree on anything you've said. But of course, it takes great effort. You had an interesting blog post about decisions as effort. I'm not sure if you put it quite in these terms, but we've had guests on the show who talk about developing the muscles of morality, of decision making. How do we get from the theory of books like This is Strategy, Make Better Plans, to actually making better plans rather than just talking about them?
Well, I was with you until the last 4 words. We got to talk about them. We're not. The years I was at Yahoo, nobody said their strategy out loud to me. I was the only person who was able to articulate it.
What was your role at Yahoo? But you were probably paid to be that person.
I was mostly paid to sit in a corner and be quiet. They bought my company. They only had 5 vice presidents, and I was one of them. But they were terrible at acquiring companies. And my
They probably
point
should have
is,
bought Google rather than your company.
well, they made plenty of money buying my company, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, anyway, the point I'm making is I've been in the room at Microsoft, at Google, at Shopify, at lots of big companies, Facebook, that have trouble articulating their strategy. I have definitely been in the room at 5-person, 50-person, 100-person companies where they have trouble. I've discovered politicians who have been elected to really high office who can't articulate their strategy because we're afraid to talk about it. So my book has 500 questions in it. And all I'm asking people to do is find a buddy or 5 buddies and talk about it. Because if you do that, your strategy gets better.
So that's the role of focus groups for what you call bold ideas. And of course, that's kind of part of your business model as well. I mean, you have on your website, if you want to get involved in strategy, I think you can sign up for a course, what you call the Udemy course. What does that mean, and what does that involve?
Udemy is a platform that someone built that I have nothing to do with, where anyone can make a course. I think the Keen course could do very well. And you charge money for the course. And if people take it, they watch as many videos as you want to post with assignments. I don't think it's the best form of pedagogy. The online learning systems I've built in the past were much more interactive and peer-to-peer, but that's too much work for me. So over time, I've shifted to what people are more accustomed to, which is, I'd like to spend 5 hours learning about this. So I have a strategy course, a marketing course, and other things on Udemy. But my business model doesn't really have a business at its center. My business model is, can I earn the benefit of the doubt by narrating for people ideas that help them get to where they want to go? If I can do that, then paying my bills takes care of itself.
Well, I think, Seth Godin, you are an example of a profitable prophet, are you? I couldn't resist. I apologize, but that was
no, I am not, because a prophet.
You're an unprofitable prophet?
No, a prophet says, take my word for it. I was told this by a higher authority. I never, ever say, take my word for it. What I say is, take a look and you decide.
So what's the opposite of a prophet? Prophet. You're a profitable something.
I'm a ruckus maker. I am on a good day, a truth teller, but mostly I'm a narrator. I'm trying, I think like you, to highlight for people things they might not be seeing.
And they don't want to hear. Well, it's a real honor to have you on the show. I don't know quite why we've waited 13 years for you to come back, but we'll certainly do it before. When would be the date? 2037. Can you imagine?
I already added it to my calendar. It's too late. It's written in ink. I'm going to see you in 2027.
I'll see you in 2037. I hope you'll. I hope you won't have lost any more hair. I couldn't resist that one. I would have certainly lost a lot more hair by 2037.
We'll get you some yellow glasses.
Thank you. And I want those yellow. Yeah, for people watching, Seth has the coolest yellow glasses, and yellow is my color. He's stolen it from me. So we will talk again in the next 13 years. Seth Godin, author, This is Strategy, an honor, really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Keep making a ruckus.